out. 11 years ago, I was having coffee with a friend, and I asked her what she was doing on the weekend, and she told me that she was attending a movie viewing of a documentary called Nefarious, and that was an award-winning documentary put out by Exodus Cry, which I did not know at the time is an anti-trafficking organization that is working nationally and I believe internationally. They have a lot of lighthouses, they call their rescue homes lighthouses, where victims can go to be restored and redeemed, which is an incredibly difficult, complex process. So I got curious and this movie was touring only in bigger cities, so I knew I couldn't see it. And then I will just give you a card. And then I went online, looked things up, and I just remember the moment so clearly. I felt like I was just sucked into my desktop computer. It was one of those big old ones at the time, and just feeling like I couldn't click fast enough to read everything about Exodus Cry, everything about Nefarious. And so I guess what it felt like to me was like an itch that I didn't know I had was being scratched. And so as soon as Nefarious stopped touring, I purchased a licensed copy and approached my church at the time, which was part of Beaver Evangelical on 33, and said, can we do a community viewing and see if we want to start a group? Not we, the church, but kind of, I wanted it to be more of a community group, but that the church would host. And so we did that. We had really great attendance. It's an amazing documentary, very sad, but ends on a very redemptive note. And at the end of the night, I held up a clipboard, said if anybody's interested in seeing what we can do to fight trafficking, and I ended up with about 10 names. I still have about 8 to 10 members. There's, some people have come and gone, but I do still have a core group from that day one. And, we thought, I remember uttering the words, this will be as big or small as we want it to be, and God laughed, and,
like he so often does.
Yes, he so often does. We tasked ourselves year one with awareness, so we had tables at any outdoor event, indoor event, where you could rent a table and just talk to people. Just talk to people about why on earth are we even talking about sex trafficking in Beaver Dam, Wisconsin. And that was probably the biggest step and hurdle to overcome, because a lot of people, including myself before I knew, have this idea that sex trafficking is in Europe, it's in Vegas, it's in LA, and all those things are very true. A lot of us have seen the movie Taken with Liam Neeson, where it's the kidnapping, and that is also true. But what we had to learn as we attended conferences and read a lot and did our research was that trafficking is in every state, and probably in every county of every state. It's indeed in every county in Wisconsin. It has been reported in all 72 counties in Wisconsin. I'll just keep going for a minute before I start moving my slides. But it looks different in rural areas, and that's what we had to really teach ourselves, so that we could teach others that just because you're in a rural farming community does not mean that trafficking is not an issue. It doesn't just happen in the big cities. It doesn't just happen in Milwaukee or even Madison. And even law enforcement has told us even the difference between what trafficking looks like in Madison versus Milwaukee is vastly different. But it's still there, it just presents differently. So I got fired up, and God got fired up with me. And because God is in the business of delivering slaves, and so we felt the call. It's been hard. It's hard to talk about this all the time. Even driving to your lovely church this morning, I always feel a sadness that I'm going to burden people with what I have been burdened with and my team has been burdened with. Because once you know it, you can't unknow it, and you just kind of lose a little bit of, the innocence of that people are good and that humanity is good, because the reality can be really hard. But we very strongly feel that this is a topic, the topic of sex trafficking, where education really truly does lead to prevention. And because none of us are youth, that's okay, because we all have youth in our lives. And so we try to get the information kind of dripped down to the youth that are in our lives. So we are a chapter of Five Stones, Fox Valley, Appleton area. They were the first Five Stones. I believe they've been together now probably, if we've been 11, then they're probably 15, 16 years. And we've been functioning, we started out Five Stones Beaver Dam, and we kept getting calls to go present places further outside of the city. And so we rebranded about 5-6 years ago as Five Stones Dodge County, just to more accurately represent who we serve. And we go outside of Dodge County too, but this is our community that we're really trying to win and affect, that our youth won't be trafficked. So we are all volunteer, and then somebody asked where our name came from. Well, I think it was Jody this morning. And we are from the Bible story of David fighting the giant Goliath with 5 smooth stones. We are fighting the giant of sex trafficking, and our 5 stones are awareness, education, prevention, networking, and collaboration. And that is indeed what we've spent these last 11 years doing. We find ourselves sometimes tasked with a theme or an objective to every year. It feels like God just like places it on our spirit, or we recognize that there's a bigger issue here. So, year 1.5 it was all about awareness. Then we stepped into prevention through education. We're always taking everything with us along the way. And then I think about year 3.5 to 4, we started fighting demand, which, if demand for commercial sex would go away, then trafficking would have to go away as well. I'll talk a little bit more about that. I would first love to get a feel for everybody in the room where you feel like you're at with your knowledge of sex trafficking. So just with a closed fist would be, I don't know anything about it. And then, up to 5 where I know everything about it. If you would just show me kind of where you feel you're at. Yeah, don't apologize for less fingers, because that tells me that our time together is worthy and purposeful, and I actually prefer to see that. If everybody held up 5, I'd pack up your computer and go home. So thank you. I think I can play my little video and just hold it up, because it's only 2.5 minutes. This is a video by Shared Hope International. They also fight trafficking internationally. And they have a lot of great resources, and so we like to utilize some of the materials. The purpose of me wanting to show you this little video is to kind of get you in the same headspace of the world of trafficking and what it really means, what it really feels like, what it might look like. This is a little vignette about a girl, but we'll talk a little bit more about that too. Hopefully I can display. Wait, let me pause it. Oh, what have I done? I could. On this one?
Right here, I think almost everything.
I could, except let me unhook. Is it gonna be okay if I unhook this? Okay. And then I need to go back. Sorry.
It's not hard to hold it even.
What's that?
We go into the TV.
Yeah, I actually had that thought. You could just move us all out into the narthex and watch it on basement.
Well, it's only 2.5 minutes. I don't know if it's worth the trouble or not.
That's what I'm thinking, that 40 years, it gets to be having
Yeah.
something to do that.
Well, it's good to hold things. I just wanna,
You're
Father,
making it up in your heart.
What's that?
if you would just stay up here and make sure I know how to play it. How do I, or maybe our tech person, how do I just I did turn up the volume just now. See, it just goes to the next slide. It's embedded. I just could use these. There. Oh, there we go. Oh, there we go. Thank you.
You will hear than others.
Her story begins like any other.
I don't think others can see that.
She desires relationships
You see it?
that are safe, supportive, affectionate. But what she took for love turned manipulative, violent, controlling, isolating. into a world of trafficking. Because buyers pay traffickers to supply younger and younger children. And she's waiting for you to notice. She's not in class. She's not safe in bed. She's not scoring the goal. She is being bought and sold for sex. But would you know it if you saw it? Shared Hope International aims to reverse this cycle. We educate on signs of trafficking, train law enforcement, advocate for stronger laws, offer shelter and services, all to stop the exploitation once and for all. So, she is in class, is scoring the goal, is safe in bed. Pretty simple.
Just leave it here now, because then you can kind of see a little bit of. I'm not sure how to turn that off. I don't know if you want to. Everybody can hear me fine, right? I think yes. Okay. All right, so you'll notice that that was about a young girl, but I want to say that more and more boys are being trafficked. So when we started 11 years ago, it was about, boys were about 25% of trafficking victims. Today, they are anywhere from 36% to 45%. So they're very rapidly catching up where it's going to be either or. A big part of that is the LGBTQ community is at great risk of being trafficked because they oftentimes end up on the streets. They get kicked out of their homes, so things like that. And traffickers look for people on the streets who are vulnerable, don't have someplace to go. It's not by mistake or accident. They're definitely looking for them. So we'll talk today about what trafficking is, why it matters to us, and what we can do. So I mentioned that it has been reported in all 72 counties in Wisconsin, so none of us can say we don't really have to worry about this really isn't a problem here for us. It's here, and frankly, Wisconsin tends to end up in the top 5 to top 3 out of our nation for trafficking. So if ever we thought that this is not our problem, that should tell us otherwise. So we've asked a lot of questions at meetings, at conferences. We're actually part of the Madison Anti-Trafficking Consortium. So we've asked a lot of questions there about that. We've asked questions to law enforcement. And what we've been told is that Wisconsin has very strong highway systems, which traffickers and buyers both need. We also have an inordinate amount of hotels off of that excellent highway system, which traffickers and buyers also need, as well as our proximity to Milwaukee. So anything I say that is offensive today in the house of God, I apologize for, but it's just part of like hearing the reality of it. And so Milwaukee in the world of trafficking is known as Pimp College, or the Harvard of pimping. So people who are either in trafficking or want to get involved in trafficking, like criminals from other states, will come to Milwaukee to learn at the feet of successful traffickers. Because Milwaukee has some of the most successful traffickers. And it's crazy. They will hold their own conferences, they author books, it's maddening. And so when we've asked law enforcement, well, okay, I just looked up a trafficker right here and it's very obvious, it's in your face. Why don't you just go knock on his door and arrest him? And I mean, we're naive, right? I mean, I ask a lot of naive questions in order to learn. And, they said, if you don't have an airtight case with a trafficker, you will never get a second chance with that trafficker again, because they're very savvy, they're always one step ahead of law enforcement, and you want that case to be shut tight and closed so that it'll send them to prison.
Can it also be that in other states, they look the other way or don't report it? That's why we end up higher, because we're doing more stuff? catch them?
No, I think we're higher because we have a lot of corridors. So highway corridors where traffickers can move their people, move their victims easily, without being seen, and then just the proximity to Milwaukee. You know, it moves around, it changes. I don't know where it's at right now because I don't look it up all the time. It's just to note that, you know, we do have a problem here in Wisconsin. Also, the Native American, indigenous communities, tribal communities, probably what I wanna be saying, have a very big trafficking problem within their communities as well. And we have a lot of that as well. I mean, look at like, it's interesting to me. I mean, I've lived here 21 years. But we recently, like a couple of years ago, had our son-in-law move here, and he started to talk about all the different Wisconsin names and struggled to say some of them. Like he called my daughter, his wife, coming home one day and said, "Hey, have you ever been to Akanakamakawak?" But it did make me realize this is a very native area. This is a very indigenous tribal area, and there's a lot of trafficking within the tribal communities. So, I mean, the statistics are really always changing because you can only count what's reported. In the world of trafficking, things are very dark and underground, and so anything I say or if it had been up there, I'd just have you looking at them, but it's probably more or bigger. This is just like the best guesstimate by the experts. And so 300,000 children exploited in the US annually, 4.5 million in forced sexual exploitation globally. And then just to know that victims of trafficking can be girls, boys, men, women, even babies. So I know we have this idea of it's always girls, but that is not true, and more than ever, that's not true. So we want to be thinking about the people in your life who are either of those sexes. I've already talked a little bit about boys. So I'd like you to take just a moment and think about who in your lives, maybe it's a child, maybe it's a grandchild, maybe it's a niece, nephew, a neighborhood boy, someone where you work, or girl, someone in the age group of 12 to 14 who you love and care for and have influence over. And I just want you to take a moment to think of that person and put them in your head. That's who we're talking about today, because the average age that youth is trafficked is 12 to 14 years old. So I want you to keep that person in your mind, because it will help you to understand how easy it is for traffickers to trick their victims and to use the techniques that they do, which we will talk through as best we can. Watching our time. Okay, so we're going to talk about human trafficking, filter that down to sex trafficking, because that's specifically what we do at Five Stones. And then we will very briefly go through who is the trafficker, who is the buyer, who is the victim. So human trafficking is modern day slavery in which by force, fraud, and or coercion, someone is forced to either do labor trafficking, exploited for labor, and or exploited for commercial sex. So forced labor, sexual exploitation. When we funnel that down to sex trafficking, obviously still modern day slavery, but this is a commercial sex act that is being induced by force, fraud, and or coercion. So we're talking about things like physical violence, rape, multiple rapes, gang rapes, a lot of lies, a lot of false promises. And then once you are wrapped up into the life, which is what it's called, victims will say it's 24/7 life of fear and violence and manipulation. A lot of threats. So let's talk about the trafficker. The trafficker is the person that historically would be known as the pimp. We personally have stopped using that terminology, and we encourage others to stop using it, because somewhere in my children's generation, so my kids are now 30, 28, 26, and 23, but when they were in high school, something happened with the word pimp, and it became like your truck is all pimped out, your car is all pimped out, you've added extras, you've made it cooler than it was. I even had, my daughter had some friends over, and afterwards one of them said, "Tell your mom she's such a pimp." This was before I was involved in Five Stones, so it didn't land as hard as it would have now. And I said, what on earth could that possibly mean? And they said, well, they think you're cool, they like you a lot, you're fun. Oh, okay. Well, then I get involved in Five Stones and I think, well, I'm not using that word anymore because I want to honor the victims and what they've been through from the traffickers and buyers. And so we really just, I explain it just so that you realize that's the same person, but we leave it there. So this is the trafficker, is the person using force, fraud, and or coercion to profit off of another human being for commercial sex. I already talked about Milwaukee. I'll mention the top 3 avenues today. It wasn't always this way, but as you can imagine, if you, person that you put in your head, if you know what their lives are like and how they function, the number 1 way that traffickers are getting their victims today is social media. And when I met with, in Mayville, they have some sort of a, I don't want to call it institution, but all of the churches get together a certain amount of times and they do like youth groups. And I think it's because they're each so small that they just combine. So I was invited to speak to the youth, all the youth from the Mayville churches. And I asked them, you know, where do you go to hang out with your friends? And they were like, well, I'm either home, like playing video games with them while they're at their home, or we go to each other's homes and we play video games online. So the kids are online and traffickers know that. And when traffickers realized that kids were going online, traffickers went online. And it's better for them because they can pretend to be whoever they want online, in game rooms, in chat rooms. You're not just playing a game, you're talking to each other while you're playing a game. So they're interacting with these youth as if they are the same age group. They're very articulate for the trends and for the language of a certain age group. And some of them will even go so far as to use voice changers if they can't, you know, sound like a kid. And they're very aware of the lingo of whatever age group they're trying to infiltrate. So they're also looking for things online, even, you know, Facebook, Twitter isn't Twitter anymore, it's X, but Snapchat. They're also looking for kids who are complaining about things, angry at the world, angry at their parents, potential runaway, someone they can step in. Someone who doesn't know who they are, very low self-esteem. Think of the kids that you put in your head. That age group tends to have very low self-esteem. I feel like I didn't really start to realize who I was to my 30s and 40s. So again, very easily tricked. We'll talk more about that as we go. So number 1, social media. Number 2 is still our neighborhoods. They do still go to the parks, the arcades, the fast food restaurants, the bus stations, looking for, maybe at a fast food restaurant, someone who's been sitting there for hours with nothing to eat. Like, hey, can I buy you a meal? And hey, you seem like you're upset. Do you want to talk? Oh yeah, I was angry with my family too at your age. I ran away. It was the best decision I ever made. If you want to, I can give you a place to stay, and I can get you meals, and I can hook you up. And I mean, it can be that simple. And then the number 3 way that traffickers get at their victims is actually through peers. It's a little more complicated to describe, but sometimes if you're caught up in the life, you're so desperate that you would bring someone else in with you if you had the opportunity, like a classmate. A lot of traffickers, which you'll see when we talk about the grooming cycle, will really be showering their person during kind of the false promises stage with a lot of new and expensive clothes and purses, and then someone at school might say, where did you get it? Oh my gosh, I need a boyfriend like you have, you know. Oh, well, come to a party Friday, they're having a party, I'll introduce you to his friends. Maybe one of them will be your boyfriend. What that girl or boy doesn't know is that that's a shopping party for traffickers and buyers. So it's not that hard for peers to get peers involved. So the process is called grooming. The language that is used in the life is equestrian. You're groomed, and if that's a successful groom and you are indeed taken or, you know, not necessarily abducted, but kind of like what I just described, that conversation with fast food restaurant, that type of thing, you might end up in your trafficker's stable, their apartment, the home where they're keeping their victims. But there's this other face of trafficking, especially in areas like ours, where a victim is tricked, drugged, raped and taped, and then the trafficker will use that to blackmail them. So there have been victims from our area who are now grown up and have become speakers and authors so that other people can not fall for the same tactics of traffickers. And if you're blackmailed like this, you're living this double life. You're in your home, everything seems normal, but you might have a second phone that goes only to your trafficker that they've given you, and they will make appointments and you'll have to sneak out of your house, or they're gonna release the tape to family, friends, school, work, youth group. That's threats that they make. The other thing that a local survivor did, and when I say local, I don't necessarily mean Beaver Dam or Dutch County, but localized to our area. She would get on the bus to go to school on days where her trafficker, who was blackmailing her, made appointments, and get off the bus at school, walk down the street to get in her trafficker's car. He would take her to appointments, and she'd be back by the 3 o'clock bus. So if you do that not often enough, it won't really raise a lot of red flags, and I mean, that's what she had to do. And this was a girl coming from a very well-to-do family, so it's not about whether you're living in the projects or whether you're a bad kid or whether you're making bad choices. She just got tricked. She got tricked with a drug, got raped and taped and blackmailed, and believed him. And I mean, her dad was an attorney. The only way she got out of it was the family moved. Dad got a different job, they moved, and she was out of it. Yes.
When you use the word taped, they are videotaping these, and that's one of the things they're using to blackmail.
Yes, yeah. So we tell kids, just don't accept open drinks from anybody that you don't know very well. Because that's what happened to her. It was a newish friend from school, it was a guy. He quick had to run into his house to get someone. He was giving her a ride home and said, come on in with me, do you want a drink? Gave her an open soda, drugged her, raped her and taped her. Yeah, super sad. If it seems like I'm callous to it, it's only because I talk about it a lot. It still breaks my heart. So they'll target a victim through some of the ways that I've described, looking for kids. We'll go through kind of that screen of who they're looking for. But they're experts on human behavior. And traffickers consider themselves businessmen. And don't for a moment think that they're just idiots because they're so evil or because they're such criminals. They're very smart and they're very good at what they do. And they really do consider themselves businessmen. So they're gonna kind of scope out their victim, whether that's online or in person. They're studiers of human behavior, body language, a kid who's kind of doesn't know themselves, who looks really like lacking confidence. They might enter into that. Your eyes are so beautiful. Has anybody ever told you how beautiful you are? Well, no. A lot of our kids never hear stuff like that. And so they just, eyes wide open, they just fall right into it. Once they kind of can pick out who they're going to start to groom or try to groom, they'll start to create relationship there, gain some trust, and very often they will present as like an older boyfriend. So a lot of traffickers would put up antennas on us and our kids. So a lot of traffic, just because they're hard people, they look hard. So if you're that kind of trafficker, you're gonna have a spotter, and that's gonna be like a 20-something-year-old who does this work for you. They're articulate, they're charming, they really don't put off any red flags. If it's a guy, they're cute, they're good looking. If it's a woman, they're sexy, and so it would be very easy for those kids that you put in your head, if they have these vulnerabilities that we'll talk through more, to engage them in a potential oh my goodness, I can't believe I'm gonna have an older boyfriend and he's so cute. I'm gonna be the most popular girl in school. Or for a young boy, I can't believe this girl's interested in me. I'm gonna be one of the cool kids now. It's not that hard. So they'll put out people that can really just slide into that conversation and engage our kids really, really well. So then they'll create this false relationship or where they're filling one of those needs that we talked about that we'll talk more about. And eventually they'll start to isolate our kids from family and friends, because it's family and friends like you and me who are gonna go, something's not right. This is not sitting well with me. And victims have been rescued or even kept from taking that next step into the trafficking world because family and or friends have said that something's not right, I'm raising the alarm, and they don't see it because they're all wrapped up in it. But so someone from the outside is what it very often takes, and we are those people. And law enforcement has even told us we can't have eyes everywhere, law enforcement. But if the community has eyes everywhere, then there are eyes everywhere. So they ask us to be those eyes and to call us in those moments where we notice something's not right, something's off. Because it's not up to us to intervene. Traffickers are very dangerous. They're usually carrying weapons. I mean, this is like who their person that they are exploiting is profit, pure profit to them. So then some abuse will begin and the switch will be flipped, and instead of like behaving like this doting boyfriend or girlfriend, or even like some of the women traffickers or spotters present as like a mom figure to girls who don't have a mom for whatever reason. So there's that too. And then it'll just kind of start to turn ugly and they'll lose their temper. And it's like these kids are so confused because they've never seen this side of this person before that they think they love and know. And, the tricks can be as simple as, I'm gonna lose my car or my home if you don't help me. I love you so much, I know you love me too. Will you just do this one thing for me? Will you just dance at the local strip club? And so people who say, oh, the strip clubs have been here for generations, they don't cause any harm, it's fine. That is very much a falsity. Strip clubs are a gateway to trafficking, and if you can talk that poor potential victim into dancing one night at a strip club because you love me and you're gonna help me out and that's all the money I'll need, then a trafficker knows, and from the mouth of traffickers, then I know I have them, then I know I own them. And usually one night at a strip club dancing leads to commercial sex, even on that first night. After that, it's all about maintaining control through threats, violence, fear, and blackmail. So I want to talk about who they're looking for, because this is the way that we can keep our eyes open to step into the life of a kid or even an adult who has some of these vulnerabilities, because traffickers are just so good at scoping these out. So I've mentioned low self-esteem, history of abuse. It's just a thing. If you've been abused, a predator can almost smell that on you. There's a hurt, there's a woundedness, there's a brokenness. It's why so many people who have been abused statistically tend to be re-abused. Kids in the foster system, because they obviously already have some vulnerabilities and have lived through some hard things, or they wouldn't be in the foster system. I want to mention victims of natural disasters, not because we have so many in Wisconsin, because we don't, but just to kind of give you the mindset of the evilness of a trafficker. And they will go or send spotters to places with natural disasters because they know there will be chaos and confusion and families will be separated and kids will be orphaned. And they will stand on the corners and say, we've got a house going where until you find your family or your people, we'll feed you and we'll keep you, and then they disappear. So that's just to get into that mindset of just the evilness of it. Drug abuse in the family is also a problem in the world of trafficking, because sometimes, and it feels so horrendous, and it is so horrendous, but drugs make people do things. This is why trafficking and fighting drug use kind of, dovetail. Because if you have a parent who's addicted to drugs and they don't have the money for their next hit, and their body is now making those decisions for them, they might rent out their kid to make money for their next drug hit. And it happens enough that it's a problem. Also, traffickers use drugs to keep their victims addicted to them. So there have been instances where victims have been rescued, and you would think, oh my gosh, they must be so relieved, the life of violence is over, the life of multiple rapes is over. And they'll go back because they're addicted to the free drug that their trafficker is providing them, which is exactly the point for the trafficker. Really, really heartbreaking. Kids in the juvenile justice system, people with disabilities, mental illness, cognitive delays. A buyer, not all buyers, but some buyers are willing to take advantage of anyone. It's not always like they're looking for the sexiest this or that. Some buyers would prefer someone with cognitive delays and disabilities because then they can take more advantage of them, force more things on them. It's really, really heartbreaking. runaways, 1 in 3 runaways will be approached by a trafficker within 48 hours. Again, it's not random, they're looking for them. Any unmet needs create the vulnerabilities, homelessness, poverty. But probably the most important thing is that anyone can be trafficked, because any one of us at any given time in our lives is more vulnerable than other times, right? So those kids that you thought of, any moments in time where they are vulnerable is when a trafficker would want to step in. And I don't say it to scare you and make us live, on the edge like that, but just having the awareness, and then we can share that awareness with them or notice things with them, can really help us to keep kids out of the situation in the first place.
And all the pictures of missing persons, would you assume that they're all being trafficked?
Whenever I see a notice go up that someone is newly missing and it's a kid, that's exactly what I think of, and I say a prayer for them, and I pray that they won't get taken in. But, a lot of times, they're talking with someone online, they're gonna, for example, somebody wants to buy their gaming system that they're selling, meet me at, 2 a.m. for some reason, and I'll purchase that from you, and then they're never seen again. So yes, there are a lot of ties between anti-trafficking organizations, like legal ones, not necessarily nonprofits like us, but legal ones, and government ones that do work with missing and exploited children's organization. Yeah, great question. We used to use a video, it was a true story of a girl who was almost trafficked, but for someone who raised an alarm. And she was a straight A student, she was taking AP courses in high school, she was a cheerleader, she was on track to go to college for nursing, and I mean, she was literally hours away from being trafficked across state lines. And so it's anyone can really be trafficked. So let's talk about the buyer. We've got about 7 minutes left before we maybe do some Q&A. Maybe we'll go 10 because we're kind of doing our Q&A in between as well. But I don't wanna take up too much of your time. So it seems like I'm going really fast, that's why. So the buyer is the person, again, who is historically known as the John. We do not use that name because obviously the name John is a lovely biblical name, and we just refuse to degradate it that way. So this is the person who is purchasing commercial sex. Some buyers will say, I had no idea this was a minor. I would never have done that if it was a minor. I've literally sat with a buyer who said, I thought it was just a business deal. She was selling something, I was buying something, and I thought everybody was happy. I thought we're all happy. But so many people who are in those appointments for commercial sex are victims. And if they're not minors any longer, research shows that they were either victims at one time and then aged out, and now they're prostituting because that's all they think they are good for, because that's the lie they've been fed. Or a lot of them are people who were molested or sexually abused, and then they end up in the life of prostitution because they think they're taking the power back. But nobody would really ever choose it long term if they were in their right mind and heart and spirit, because it's a violent lifestyle. You're 18 times more likely to be murdered in the life. The average age that you might get to is about 34 in the life. I mean, it's not so you'll hear the lie sometimes that, it's my power, I'm making lots of money. Most people who are involved in commercial sex, the money's going to the trafficker, and there is no power, it's victimization. So buyers can be from all demographics, but the difference between the buyer and like what we warned our kids of, like, don't ever go alone to talk to, the creepy guy in the alley, that type of thing. The buyer has money to spend on commercial sex, thousands of dollars. So this is not the creepy guy in the alley. These are people working regular jobs that we are rubbing shoulders with, without a doubt, because the typical average buyer in America is a 35-year-old educated, married male with children. And they've got money to spend. The reason that I would venture to guess every single buyer becomes a buyer is pornography. And so if we really want to kill demand, we really need to fight the pornography industry. And when I talk about this, like in a room full of adults or a room full of middle or high schoolers, I definitely change. We have different presentations for different age groups. I change the way I present it, but inevitably there's some squirming, and that's okay. Like, I'm never here to shame anybody. Pornography is courting our culture, and you don't even have to go looking for it. It will come looking for you. Average age of first exposure for a boy is 8 to 11 years old. And so I love talking to youth because I talk to them about, if you haven't already looked at it or used it, just help each other to stay off of it. It'll be the best thing you ever do for yourself. If you're already using, there's so many resources now online to back off of pornography, get off of pornography. But it's what's feeding trafficking. And the reason is that, you start down here low level with a picture, you might move up to a video, and then you need kind of more videos, they get a little more intense, they might get a little more violent, and it's made that way. It's made to make you keep going up the ladder until, for some people, they want to go and act that out with a human being. And that's where traffickers make their money, because they know that this is gonna happen. So we are breaking open the conversation on pornography, because pornography has normalized deviant sex and violent sex and dark web pornography, where it's like you're literally watching crimes taking place in real time. And so we're just gonna try to balance that out with normalizing the conversation, because the worst kind of sin is secret sin against the body. And if we can't talk about it, it just continues to grow. But if we can talk about it with each other, if we can model with each other how to not use it or how to get off of using it, if we can help those kids that you put in your heads to never look at it or to get off of it, then we change the future of trafficking. Because if we just keep going status quo and everything keeps happening and rolling the way it's rolling, the kids that we love and care for who are in middle school and high school today, they're going to become the future buyers, some of them, because the pornography industry is making it so. So our victims, more than half of victims are children, and out of that 55.6%, 1 out of 4 are indeed sold by family members. So there's just a lot of dysfunction, there's a lot of broken families, there's a lot of drug addiction. There's sometimes the broken families will bring, you'll bring in your new boyfriend, and with him comes his 18-year-old son. That guy looks around the room at the young children and says, I can make some money here. I mean, there's just all sorts of reasons, but it's just astounding that family members would do that, but that is the reality. And these are obviously broken, lost people who are making decisions that are ungodly. We talked through all of that. So why does it succeed? Well, sex trafficking is actually the fastest growing criminal industry in the world right now. When we first started 11 years ago, the #1 most lucrative criminal industry globally was, well, any guesses?
Drugs.
Yes, drugs, cocaine, drugs, yeah. Any guesses on what #2 was? What else do criminals sell?
That's
Not there yet, yeah,
not quite.
not quite yet. Weapons. So it was drugs, weapons, and then, yes, sex. About a year and a half later, we revisited those stats, and sex trafficking had bumped out the weapons. And so now it's drugs, sex trafficking, weapons. The reason is, well, we are all of the age when there were still business classes in school. Everything's changed. So it's the perfect business model. There's a demand because of pornography. Traffickers are willing to be criminals to provide, to supply, and then it's a grand profit, because if you're a criminal who's selling drugs and weapons, you have to keep going to your supplier, giving them money, right, to get your supply, and then you take that to your buyer. Then you need more money to go back to your supplier. But if you are a sex trafficker and you have a person, a body, that's a reusable resource that you can sell 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 times a day. We've heard 50 sometimes. It's why there's so much disease, early death, pregnancies, a lot of things like that. It's a reusable resource, it's sickening, and it absolutely destroys lives. And this is why we just had, like, at the table at the consortium years ago, groups like us who are nonprofits, who are about education, we had that light bulb moment where, like, we gotta do prevention. It's gotta be all about prevention for us, because once you're trafficked, it's incredibly difficult to redeem and restore that. It's the most complex, layered trauma, because it's like violence every day, it's rapes every day, it's the mental manipulation, and so we're all about the prevention. We've already talked through a lot of that, all of that actually. And then I don't think I need to tell anybody here that we are an incredibly sexualized culture. And I would just really challenge all of you to speak out against that. When movies come, when we're seeing things that we know aren't healthy for our community, there is always someone you can go tell, we don't like this, you're not getting my money, you know, and it doesn't have to be the big things. You don't have to be like up at the Capitol, like go ahead, you can review almost anything online these days. You can review movies, so I've done that, you know, 50 Shades of Grey should not be in the regular theaters. 17-year-olds should be able to go see pornography. At the time, I called it soft porn, and somebody called me out on that and said, you call it pornography, not soft pornography, because it's pornography. And that was a great challenge to me. And then simple things like pay attention to commercials. If commercials for food are using sex to sell it, I go online and say, I don't understand why you're using sex to sell. Like, we're already in an overly sexualized culture. Chex Mix 2 years ago had a commercial where a teenage boy was at a teenage party eating Chex Mix, and this cute girl goes by and gives him the sexy look, and then he looks at the Chex Mix and goes like, oh, it must be this. Pops more in his mouth, puts it down, follows her to a bedroom. So I'm online. Hello, Chex Mix. Who do you think purchases the groceries in the family? So do you think like telling me that buying Chex Mix for my kid is gonna mean he's having premarital sex is gonna make me run to the store for Chex Mix? I haven't bought it since, and I told them I won't. The commercial was down in like 2 weeks. I think there must have been other complaints, but we do have a voice, we just need to use it, and we're never too old to use it. We need to keep speaking out about things. All right, I'm just gonna finish there because my alarm went off for a little bit of Q&A. These are just some of the billboards that we've had: pornography plus sex trafficking. It's time to stop ignoring the links. Porn creates demand with an arrow between sex and trafficking. When we put billboards up, we know where they're going, but sometimes we'll give them 2 graphics and we don't tell them which one should go where. This one ended up right across from Sensations in Beaver Dam, which is the lingerie, pornography, sex toy store. Ended up literally across the street with the arrow pointing to it. And people kept coming up to us saying, that was the genius, that was the genius. And we were like, God did it. Like, we didn't place it there. We didn't think about the arrow, you know, but God did. So what you guys, I just do want to mention these last little bits, pieces, because this is what you can notice and what ways that you can help. Very simple. If you work somewhere where you interview people, whether it's for jobs or you work at a hospital or medical facility, and they're coming in with someone else and they kind of have to look to that person for permission to answer questions, or that person's answering for them, that's a red flag. Sometimes traffickers brand their victims just for the same reason that cattle ranchers brand their cattle. They'll put their own brand here or on the back of the neck, or if they're really rotten, they'll put it here and really just ruin you. Those are the most successful ones that have their own brand, like Nike is a switch, they'll have their own brand. That does not mean everybody with tattoos there is being trafficked. You're always looking for multiple red flags, right? Numerous unrelated people in the home. If you're in the health field or someone in your home keeps having repeated STIs or STDs, that could be a problem or an indication. If you work in the schools, excessive absences, or they disappear often, then they're back, then they're gone, then they're back. New clothes or jewelry that you know they can't afford. multiple cell phones. No youth really needs a second cell phone. Like, I can't think of one reason why, other than that a trafficker gave it to them. And they might still think, well, it's just my boyfriend who gave me a phone. That's before the switch is flipped. Significantly older boyfriend or girlfriend, or someone new in their life. And so we just ask that you look out for each other, look out for the youth in your circle of influence. Tell 3 other people what you learned today, because then you're spreading the knowledge, which spreads the education, which spreads the prevention. We have the hotline number on the cards. If you ever notice anything, we always say call 3 numbers if you notice something. The hotline, law enforcement, and human services. Because hopefully, because we're realists, hopefully one of those people is gonna do something about it. Sometimes all 3, maybe 2 will, but at least you're covering your bases. Say no to pornography, and then be a mentor and influence in regard to that. But also, like, edify the kids in your life, edify the youth, affirm them. I mean, when I'm speaking in a Christian setting, it's so much easier because we speak in secular settings, and it can be hard. But, you know, we want to tell kids that you are made for so much more than this. You are sons and daughters of the King. He made you for greatness, great purposes in this world. And trafficking is not what you were created for. And so a lot of the kids who get tricked, like, they're not hearing those affirming messages in their lives. When I speak that to youth in a different way, in a secular classroom, I'm telling you, they lean in, especially the middle schoolers, and it's very clear to me that some of them are hearing nothing good in their broken homes. And they're not built up, and so a trafficker will tack onto them because they have so many vulnerabilities. That is the cheapest and easiest thing that I can leave you with. Edify and affirm the people in your life, in your circle of influence, and you will make a difference.
Just a comment on that, I'm also a swim official. I am required I think it's maybe every other year. Actually, I think about every year now, it was every other, now every year I have to do some type of abuse recognition training.
And then are you a mandatory reporter?
Yes.
I love that. Because
And on
you're
top of
seeing
that, all the
the-
coaches have to do it, officials, and officials, it's like, they say, well, you have power over the kids, it's like, but the answer is, you know, basically what their training is you gotta stay away, not touch, not anything. And it's their, you know, and it's.
But you can notice things about the
Yeah.
kids, yeah, for sure, and have an ear out, yeah.
Is there any evidence that it's happening in the older population as well? Because I just spoke to somebody last week who was 87. She sold everything and was ready to move to Pennsylvania because she had this person that was talking to her online that was promising these things. And she literally said to me, she's like, he said everything that I wanted to hear. Is there any evidence that it's happening in the older population as well?
I don't think so, but that sounds like a scam.
Right.
I don't know what the end game would be for that person,
It may not be sexual in that case, but it is, they're after their money, they're after.
Right.
Yeah.
they're after-
The only thing that stopped her was the banker wouldn't let her transfer money.
Yeah, banks are
But like,
very good at stopping.
But is that scam to get a part of trafficking? Like, would she have been part of being trafficked then if she would have fallen for that?
I can't imagine what good an 80, did you say 85 or 86-year-old would do for traffickers? Yeah, so I would say
Heidi, is this somebody you know?
No, it was somebody I spoke to.
But ask
Because
questions.
it could be reported as other abuse.
Yeah,
Right.
so I documented all of that because I'm a mandatory reporter too. I documented all that for that, you know, we got the people involved and stuff, but.
Yeah,
But
good.
it's still, you know, in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, look what's happening with that population as well.
The things that we know are babies all the way up through men and women. We never hear anything about the elderly.
Okay.
I had 16 friend requests last week.
Yeah.
These were all
Yeah,
older men, but younger than us,
Yeah.
but still older men.
yeah.
I have 2 comments. First of all, I'd like to say, you are the best presentational speaker I've ever heard.
Oh, thank
About
you.
a gruesome topic that's said so extremely well.
Thank you.
The other thing I wanted to ask was, have you, in this area, particularly Horicon schools, done in services for the teachers?
It's really hard to get into the schools.
Really?
Yes, it's really hard to get into the
This is the
schools.
place you should be
I know.
for the teachers.
So Dodgeland School is fully educated, middle school and high school, because I worked there and I had an in and I was very close with the former superintendent. And now that we've done it enough where the health teacher has learned it, that we passed off our programs to her and now she does it. We are invited into a lot of Christian schools. We are not invited into public schools. So yes, there is a fear of parental backlash because you're talking about a topic that is somewhat uncontrolled. When we've presented at Dodgeland, teachers all the time are like, that was the most attentive my kids ever have been all year. It's an important topic, it's not a boring topic. We use different videos and stuff to keep them engaged, but kids are interested in knowing and learning about it. What I do see happening that's good news in regard to your question is that DPI has taken it to task now, and they do send to the public school districts materials that they can use, but it's not mandatory. And I wish they would make it
It should be part of health class, yeah.
right. That's where we've done it.
Health is taught anymore, but my daughter is an art teacher at Horicon, which is why I'm very concerned. I know they had programs in service time, like 3 days of programs, and I wondered if you had presented there.
I have not, but teachers do go to, I don't know if it's at CISA 6 in Oshkosh. There are conferences that teachers and counselors go to, and they definitely have a trafficking option, anti-trafficking, trafficking option.
I was gonna say, I can see where public schools wouldn't. They didn't want sex education in there. That was the parent's responsibility. Parents do not take that
That was
responsibility.
not the case in Prairie du Chien where I taught. The middle school, I don't know what it's called now, family something. She taught sex education, and my children were benefited as a result of how it was presented. And so I know that was in a public school, and that was 10 years ago. So I know there are some enlightened people who do present it at the proper age, because parents are rather intimidated by talking about sex with their children. Because it makes their children look at them like, my gosh, my parents must have had sex. There are 3 children that they must have had 3 times.
But parents depend on the schools, and
Yes,
the schools depend on the parents. And it never gets done.
And particularly in the public schools, there is a broken line of communication there now because so many families are broken.
yes.
And so it's not even what it used to be, it's worse. We've even gone so far as to, before our middle school presentation, offer a parents' night. The parents can see, that we tried this at Dodgeland and Eustis, where the parents can see what their kids are gonna be watching. So I wanted to give the parents the middle school presentation before the middle schoolers. So to avoid those problems and fears, they don't come. They don't
It's so
come.
unfortunate.
Yes, yeah, so we don't do it anymore. We
Parents
just
don't go to conferences anymore either. Has anybody, who's the, I can't think of the name now, but at the state level for public schools?
The
Was
DPI
Tony Evers,
Oh.
now the governor.
What's the question?
Who's the
Who
director?
is it?
Who is, has anybody ever
Oh,
approached that
right.
person and said,
Well, yes, that's why they've started doing, that's why they have now put out materials, that's why there are, workshops for that at the conferences that teachers and
but
counselors.
encourage that person to make it mandatory?
Well, I think everybody is encouraging, I'm not sure why it hasn't taken that leap yet. We're not really involved in legislature much, there are a lot of people around the table at the Mexican Consortium who are. But it's tough to change things.
Well, putting out information is like passing the buck to someone else to do it. Presentations like the one you just gave us is what has caused the concern. I have a 14-year-old granddaughter, who had cancer when she was 2 and 3 and 4. And right now is very,
Vulnerable?
well, no, she's not vulnerable, she's very bright, but she's very shy. And I could see her at a party with her friend, her girlfriends, that's what she does. And we all know someone like that who isn't streetwise.
Look, I could see myself being tricked. If I have a terrible event in my life and I'm in crisis mode, I could see myself being tricked, and I've been doing this for 11 years. My kids know all about it, I could see them being tricked. Because that's how good they are at what they do.
Yes.
I sat on a panel in, I don't even know what town I was in, with a retired law enforcement officer, a female. And she told me, she said I was in the courtroom with a known trafficker. That's what he was there for. And I was conversing with him and found myself being charmed by him. And she said, and I knew, and I'm law enforcement, that's how good he was at what he was doing.
Is there any success with the signs that are now in the gas station bathrooms of like who to call and is there any success with that?
I don't know if they've done any data on that. I have to believe that there must be because they do track the hotline calls. So if you go on Polaris, I believe Polaris.org, most of those signs are put out by Polaris. Some of them are part of the campaign from Madison, the Blue campaign, you might see some of those. But if you go on, I mean, if you just like type in trafficking statistics in Wisconsin, you'll see how many calls go into the hotline. You'll see kind of some data about those calls. And so it is interesting to look up. So I mean, I have to believe it's working. The hotline wasn't even established until about 6 years ago, maybe. So it used to be like trafficking victims had to go through like domestic homes and just call the police and, so now at least there's, a pipeline for, even though that's a national number, they're very adept at getting the helps to where the call was coming from.
There was actually it wasn't necessarily for trafficking, but sexual abuse hotline in Madison. It was back when I was at General Casualties. That was in about 85, 86, because I worked with a woman who would volunteer at the hotline.
Yeah, and there's overlap between both of those abuses. Yeah.
Have you presented to the city council or the county board?
For Beaver Dam?
Yeah.
I was invited to one of their meetings to talk about what we do, but I didn't present to them. Yeah.
Do you know if there's any statistics that can tell the percentage of trafficked kids that are sent overseas? Or they just sent across state lines?
I think more kids are trafficked into America. So traffickers will host job opportunities overseas in poverty areas, in areas where families can't support their kids. And it's like, go to America and be a maid and have a home and meals and get paid. And then they get here, trafficker takes their passport and says, now you're gonna work for me for free and or do commercial sex for free, because now you have a debt to me, and until you pay off your debt, you can never pay off the debt, because they'll keep adding on to the reasons why you have a debt to me. So it's more them coming here. How many of you saw The Sound of Freedom?
I'm going to, if I can figure out how to.
Yeah, so, I really appreciated that movie, but it's not necessarily our story here. Like, so our jungle is here, right? The bigger problem for us is probably a lot of American buyers going overseas to take advantage of not American children who are very young, because there's no accountability, no one's gonna know them or recognize them. And that is a big, big problem with American businessmen.
I'm so fearful of the 2 boys who are missing in Wisconsin, the little 3-year-old and the
Right.
these 12, 13-year-old boy.
Right. Now, sometimes those stories come back where it's one of the parents who took them. And, but yes, I really hope that they're not trafficked, because, once once you're trafficked across state lines, it does become a federal offense, which is better for prosecuting it, but it also makes it so much harder that you'll ever see that kid again. It's so much harder to ever get back, so. Yeah, I always say prayer for those missing kids. And on that same note, because this is a church group, you know, I have had to challenge myself to pray not just for the victims, but to pray for the traffickers and to pray for the buyers. Because if they don't find freedom and release from their sin life, then it's gonna keep happening, right? So it's so easy for us to pray for the victims, right? But for the traffickers, I pray that they will be stopped, whether that means go to prison, be caught, go to prison, or that they will just not be able to stand what they do anymore. Because I have listened to interviews with restored former traffickers, and they are restored in Christ and they are appalled at what they did. You gotta know, and it's not an excuse, but you've gotta know any trafficker did not grow up in a loving, stable home. They would not be doing what they're doing. So you gotta be so hard, you gotta turn off any compassion whatsoever. And so I just pray that traffickers get halted, and that either means yes, getting caught and going to prison, or that they just can't stand what they do anymore. And then for buyers, I go so far as to pray for impotence and sexual dysfunction, because then what are they gonna do? You know, and then also that they would be convicted or caught, not convicted necessarily by our justice system, but, you know, internal, that they just wouldn't be able to stand what they're doing anymore.
This is the most Christ-like statement I've heard in a long time.
This kind of also feeds into our safe church training that we're going through now. It's not as in-depth, but people that are on the vestry and Father Mike and I guess anybody who wants to, but we're doing safe church, talking about, you know, things on social media, church
Yes,
camps,
yes.
church schools.
Yes,
You know, people taking advantage of children and vulnerable adults.
yeah, good for you guys. I feel like you guys have a really good thing going here. Like, this was a special morning for me. I really enjoyed worshiping with you. Such a welcoming group, and I appreciate your time here after. It's not like, I'm sure you could have all gone home and had a lovely Sunday lunch, and you know what I mean? And it's not a lovely Sabbath topic, but again, God has called us to it, and He is in the business of delivering slaves, so I believe in it. I prayed on the way here. I said, I'm sorry, God, that I'm having to speak about this on your day, but it's important, and a lot of churches do request a Sunday, and so I know God knows that, and I know He appreciates that we care.
So many people stick their head in the sands, and I was just sitting here thinking it wasn't the same kind of slavery, but we fought a horrendous war a little over 100 years ago to stop slavery, and here we are.
More slaves than ever, even then, yes.
Talking
Yes.
about more in-depth and more diverse.
It would be easier to stick our heads in the sand. There are days and months where I wish I had never started this, where I could stop talking about it. But God won't, at this point, has not released me, and I understand why. And I sometimes say, I'll keep talking about it until it's gone away. But there's a part of me that thinks it may never be gone away this side of heaven, so I don't know. But I guess, you know, we're in it. We had a nun from the consortium stood up, and she was this tiny, sweetest lady. And this was in the early days of our group. And she said, we are here because of moral outrage. They were fighting sex trafficking. The sisters do amazing things to fight sex trafficking globally. But she said moral outrage, and she hit and I just thought, that's it. That's why we're all here. That's what keeps us coming back to the table. And some of our members get overwhelmed sometimes, and we just say, look, take a breather, but don't leave us unless, you know, God releases you, because we need you. And, you know, I'm the only presenter, but they do the tables, they do the side things, and that frees me up to do this. None of them want anything to do with being up front.
You said you're involved personally with Dodgson now. Do you teach there or do you teach it?
So my kids went through Dodgeland, and I've been working in some capacity at Dodgeland for, I believe, 19 years now. So mostly substitute teaching, and then for 4 years, I was the site manager for the Safe Schools Healthy Students Grant. Yeah. So I've seen a lot of the brokenness, I've seen a lot of the vulnerabilities, and yeah, luckily they're all mandatory reporters too, so.
So if not here, where, and if not on Sunday, when? So kind of my deal is, so I told you about Emma who's 17 years old. I never transport Emma, even though she has to walk about a third of the time. I'm trying to never be alone in this church with the age of my mother or under. And that if I am, somebody else knows
Yeah.
about it.
Yeah,
Because the church has done a terrible job with being safe. And-
Right.
And clergy have not had a good, we don't do well at teaching clergy boundaries, because I'm the point of the spirit we're most vulnerable, but as I model, hopefully everybody else does too.
Yeah. I will say that we have been wonderfully welcomed in the churches, and so I do think here and now is the time, right, for such a time as this. Appleton struggles to get their churches involved in the fight, and they've always said, you know, we don't get it, like, that should be the launching pad, right, the churches. And they would like say to us, we're struggling, what are you doing? And we're like, they're inviting us in. Like, I don't know, small town churches, I don't know if that's the difference. But yeah, I think here now is the time and place.
And we support your ministry, right? And we support that ministry in our outreach. I believe that we've given money to lives.
I believe so, yes, recently even, yes, because we were like, what is this? Why? Usually that will happen after I've been into a church and they'll stipend or a gift. And it just kind of happened randomly. We didn't have a connection with you guys, and so we just thought, well, God bless them. So thank you very much for supporting. And I will leave you with the two scriptures that keep us fueled for the fight, and that is Proverbs 31:8-9. Speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves, for the rights of all who are destitute. Speak up and judge fairly, defend the rights of the poor and needy. And then Psalm 82:3, defend the weak and the fatherless, uphold the cause of the poor and the oppressed. And we feel like that's God's backing through Scripture. Thank you all for being so wonderful and amazing.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming and
Anything, anything you want, you can either go through Jody or you can go through our site, our online site. I am happy to give my number or email to you here today, so. Thank you.